in Balkans. Before starting, I want to thank Professor Şahin for joining us and accepting our invite, and for you to thank you to join us here today. So.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here and have this opportunity to have an interactive discussions with you. How much time I have actually for the presentation?
25.
20, 25. Okay, I'll try not to exceed it. Well, as you're already aware, this year is very important because it's the 20th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Agreement. And as you may have already noticed in the piece that I've distributed last week to you guys for you to read before you came here, you may have noticed that Dayton is a small town in Ohio in the United States, and it's not really very important special place for many Americans, but for Bosnians it means a lot of things. It marks the beginning of their or the recognition of their existence as an independent state. It is very important because the Dayton Peace Agreement, which sets out the conditions of in societal, political, institutional structures of the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, is important because according to some, the case of Bosnia is important because it actually has been a laboratory, experimental laboratory for different reasons. It has been a laboratory for peace building. At the end of the Cold War, peace building, which means eradicating the root causes of conflict, how conflict can be prevented, how the conditions of durable, sustainable peace can be established. Has been a key area of engagement for the UN, for other international agencies, and according to some, Bosnia-Herzegovina has been a laboratory for peace building in the post-Cold War era. It has been a laboratory for state building. State building means the construction and capacity development of functioning state institutions that help manage tensions between different ethnic political groups, and institutions that may help disputes, disagreements among different groups and prevent these disagreements from turning into a violent conflict, into a war, as it happened in Bosnia-Herzegovina during the early 90s. It has been a laboratory for state building in terms of the ability of international agencies to bring democratic institutions, to bring certain democratic standards, democratic principles, models of government from the outside. It has been a laboratory for the European Union in terms of testing its ability to transform conflict-affected, war-affected countries in its region, testing its common foreign and security policy, and also testing its conflict resolution capacity. It has been a very important event. It marks an important landmark in contemporary history. Unfortunately, it's one of the most tragic, catastrophic events that we experienced in the contemporary period. But Bosnia-Herzegovina has always constituted a significant place in terms of policy matters, in terms of policy making, and also in terms of practical issues of democratic state building, how to prevent conflict. The case of Bosnia-Herzegovina is interesting because it was part of a country that used to exist, Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia for a long time was seen as a success story, as a middle way between the socialist bloc and the democratic Western bloc, and it was a cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic, multicultural state, and it was for a long time viewed as a role model for other developing countries. And no one actually would have expected a bloody civil war in Yugoslavia, a bloody disintegration of the country with the separation of first Croatia and Slovenia in 1991, and then Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1992. What actually complicated the issue or the Bosnia-Herzegovina separation from the socialist Yugoslavia was that if you look at its demographic structure, you will see that none of the ethnic groups actually forms a clear domination or constitutes a clear majority of the population. Its population is heterogeneous and it's not compact. If you compare it with the population of Croatia, where the Croats actually constitute the majority of the population, or Slovenia, where there was a compact, the relatively heterogeneous population, there was a political agreement on the future of Slovenia, because the population is made up of by mostly Slovenes who had this vision of an independent state. But when you look at Bosnia-Herzegovina, you see that some 40% of the population is constituted by Muslims, some 30% by Serbs, and approximately between 15 and 20% Croats who had a different vision. Each of these groups actually had a different vision for the future of Bosnia-Herzegovina. While the Muslims wanted a state of their own, an independent Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croats had their own vision, Serbs had their own vision. Serbs did not want to become a part of this Muslim-dominated or a country where they will be sharing power with the Muslims. They wanted to either part of Serbia or having their own state, which is often referred to as the policy of Greater Serbia or Greater Croatia, if we talk about it in the context of the Croat vision for Bosnia-Herzegovina. So it was a contested state. Each ethnic group had its own vision, and war actually broke out in March 1992, following Bosnia-Herzegovina's separation from Yugoslavia. And unfortunately, the war taking place in the middle of Europe received not less attention, but uncoordinated attention. It was a test case for the European community at the time, which was actually in a process of transforming itself into the European Union. So the European countries had their own problems, and they saw it as a case to demonstrate their ability to put an end to a conflict. But there were disagreements between different European states when it comes to the use of strategic approach, when it comes to the use of military intervention to force the fighting groups to reach a settlement, peaceful settlement. And the local leaders, like the leaders of Serbs, Croats, Muslims, they used these disagreements. They manipulated this lack of agreement between European states to their own benefit, and they sought to increase their gains on the ground. And the war in Bosnia-Herzegovina actually led to this perception: a weak EU, weak and divided EU, and a strong and willing United States. Because the conflict, the bloody conflict, the war in Bosnia-Herzegovina came to an end with the involvement of the US as a negotiator and as a willing actor. And the negotiations, peace negotiations, were held in Ohio, in Dayton, Ohio, the United States, under the mediation of the late Richard Holbrooke, and at the same time, in 1999, NATO also launched its RIO operation to force the Serbs to accept the agreements, terms of the agreements negotiated in Dayton. So the use of military means, in addition to diplomatic means, was the approach that the U.S. pursued, and it yielded results. Even though the Dayton Agreement is not a perfect agreement, it created a very complicated state on the ground. If you look at this map, for instance, if you look at this, the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, it is a decentralized, highly decentralized federal state, and 49% of this land is the Republika Srpska, where the Serbs actually constitute the majority. And 51% of the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina is the Federation of Bosnians and Croats. And it's more complicated than that. This is the first step, actually. The country, as a decentralized state, is divided into two entities, and the entity, the federation, the Bosnian Croat Federation, is divided into 10 cantons, and the cantons are divided into municipalities. It is the Republika Srpska is directly divided into municipalities. It doesn't have any cantons. Here, there are state structures, institutions at the state level, at the entity level. I mean, the federation of the Bosnian Croat Federation and the Republika Srpska are the two entities. They have their institutions, parliaments, prime ministers, ministers at the entity level, in addition to the federal level. And at the cantons level, there are local institutions and local representations as well. And according to one study, being a politician, being an MP is very profitable in Bosnia and Herzegovina because they are paid 6 times the average salary in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So it's very complicated structure here, and also the inter-ethnic boundaries here between the two entities. These borders, these internal borders, actually were created as a result of ethnic cleansing. So the Dayton Agreement, in a way, actually represents the recognition of borders created by war and ethnic cleansing. This is one of the criticisms leveled against the Dayton Agreement. So how much time I have? I think I've already finished my 15 minutes of time. I have only 5 minutes to go.
10 minutes is okay as well.
Okay, 10 minutes. What else I should actually refer to? So the Dayton Agreement created a very complicated state system in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it also created a higher institution, an international office that was created to make sure that the peace agreement would be implemented by the Serbs, Croats, and the Muslims there. That office that institution is the Office of the High Representative, and the head of that office is appointed from the outside. According to some, the creation of such an office about the local institutions is actually a contradiction between the mandate, between the objective of the Dayton Peace Agreement and the way it was put into practice. I'm going to explain it. Initially, that office, the Office of the High Representative, appointed by a group of European states and other foreign states, the idea was to facilitate or oversee the implementation of the agreement. But shortly after the official cessation of the violence conflict in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it became clear that none of the ethnic political groups in Bosnia and Herzegovina would be willing to implement the agreement, such as the return of refugees. There was a local resistance in Bosnia, and the state actually, the institutions created at the federal level found themselves in a stalemate. And there was this international conference, international meeting held in Bonn, Germany in 1997, and in that agreement the office of the High Representative was vested more powers, including the dismissal of democratically elected leaders, including the imposition of parliamentary reforms. And as a result of these changes, the head of that office became the most strong person, the most powerful person in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And according to some, this is a contradiction between the objective of promoting democracy, which indicates the which means the representation of people's popular will. On the other hand, there is a non-democratic approach adopted by the international community. A non-elected foreigner is actually placed in Bosnia-Herzegovina and is empowered all important powers, and he promotes democracy in a non-democratic way, in other words. So that was also criticized by some researchers, indicating that Bosnia is bound to fail because on the one hand it's recognized as an independent state, but it was placed under some kind of international protectorateship, or something like colonial administration, something like revival of the old colonial practices, because the appointment of a foreign official with wide-ranging powers implies the idea that the Bosnians, actually, the people of Bosnia-Herzegovina cannot govern themselves. So they need someone from the outside who should actually impose or supervise or assist with the adoption of necessary policy frameworks or reforms. This is, and today, if you look at Bosnia-Herzegovina, there is a negative peace. The idea was to bring peace to Bosnia-Herzegovina and to the region in 1995 with the NATO-led military intervention and the US-led diplomatic process. The idea was to put an end to the war there. And in terms of that objective, we can definitely say that the Dayton Agreement has been a success, because there has been no resumption of violence or outbreak of civil war in Bosnia since December 1995. But we cannot talk about a positive peace if we follow the distinction Johan Galtung makes between positive and negative peace, because while there is no war in Bosnia-Herzegovina today, the potential conditions, like the grievances or areas of grievances or problems or structures, conditions exist there. Conditions like injustices, conditions like rule of law weaknesses, conditions like inter-ethnic divides. There has been almost no contact between the Serbs and other ethnic groups. And when you look at the people's voting behavior, ethnicity forms the basis of people's choice for the political parties. And ethnic parties have even strengthened their existence. And ethnicity is an important factor for people when making their political choices. So it's in terms of negative peace, yes, we can talk about peace, but in terms of positive peace, the objective of peace building has yet to be achieved, because peace building, remember what we said in the beginning of my presentation, peace building is about the establishment of the conditions of sustainable peace that may help the recurrence of conflict, that may help eradicate the root causes of conflict. So the fault lines still exist in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and there are serious problems, and Kosovo, I think it would be fair to conclude that Kosovo is neither a functional state nor a democratic state. So thank you very much for your patience and your interest. So shall we have a discussion or any comments?
Firstly, thank you for your presentation. And I would like to ask the role of Ali Izetbegovic on the peace process and on the conflict. As far as I know, he said that the worst peace is better than the war. And he was criticized by Bosnian people very much, as far as I know.
Well, I think we should look at all leaders, all political leaders, not just Alija Izetbegovic, but the Serb leader, Slobodan Milošević, and Croat leader, Franjo Tuđman. So these three leaders, they were part of the socialist Yugoslavia. They were coming from this, the Yugoslav tradition. They were a part of this role model, this inspirational state, and later turned into enemies. And these leaders, each of these actual leaders have been criticized on different grounds. Some of them were, like Izetbegovic, for instance, was criticized for sacrificing his people, and he was criticized for being stubborn, adamant in Ohio, and he was under pressure. He was actually under pressure to agree because if you look at the structure of the Yugoslav system. Have you guys heard of the name Tito? Tito, he was the creator of this Yugoslav state. Yugoslavia was a socialist state, and it had 6 republics, including Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Macedonia, Croatia, Montenegro, and who was the 6th one? Serbia, yes. So 6 republics, and Tito created such a system that prevented the domination of none of these Yugoslav republics. How he did that? He created the Yugoslav army mainly dominated by the Serbs, but he also created an economic system in which the most developed parts of Yugoslavia, like Croatia and Slovenia, played a pioneering role. So while the military was dominated by the Serbs, the economy was actually dominated by the Croats and the Slovenes. So his system actually, this system that was based on balance of power, worked well when he was alive because he was a unifying figure. But when he was gone, in addition to a serious economic problem, there was a lack of a unifying figure like Tito himself. And each of these republics had their own political agendas once it became clear that it was almost impossible for them to stay together. And Bosnia-Herzegovina followed the suit after Croatia and Slovenia declared independence. And the war conflict became complicated in Serbia because none of the ethnic groups was the majority, actually clear majority, or in a dominant position. And because the Yugoslav army was dominated by the Serbs, that army, the weapons or the facilities that the Serb military forces had access to were used by the Serb forces in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So when the international community imposed an arms embargo on the parties in Yugoslavia, this actually disadvantaged the Muslims most. And changed and affected the terms of war on the ground. So what was going on? Croatia was recognized as an independent state. Serbia and the Serbs in Bosnia-Herzegovina was fighting against the Muslims, and the international community led by the US was trying to find a diplomatic solution to that conflict. The Croats had their own army and had their own means, logistics, and they were actually advancing their territorial gain in the Serb inhabited areas in Croatia, and they were marching towards the city of Banja Luka. And this was seen as a threat, in negative terms, by the US and its allies, and there was a pressure by the US to pressure on the Bosnian leader Izetbegovic, Tudjman, and Milosevic to accept the peace agreement. So that was actually what was going on the ground, and that was also how things were developing in Dayton, in Ohio. Whether Izetbegovic had another choice or not is actually a matter of speculation. But that was the only solution at the time that he was forced to agree, even though he was criticized for being very stubborn during the negotiations in Dayton. I hope this gives some explanation.
Thank you.
Can I ask about EU and the region?
Mm-hmm.
So, and European don't expand to the Balkan region that much, but before they created new standards like non-Schengen and non-Eurozone, and they even lowered the standards for some Eastern European countries. So can we say that the reason why EU is not expanding to the region is they avoid nationalistic conflicts, and they want to avoid an inter-EU war, and domestically domestically powerful groups in those countries avoid EU membership to be more effective in the domestic policy making?
That's a good question, actually, because like I said before, the EU has been one of the key players in this conflict, in the region as well. And the EU is using membership as a carrot for the regional states. And EU pursues what they call a strategy of member state building when it comes to their relations with Macedonia, with Bosnia, with Kosovo. And the EU is also criticized for not giving a clear vision, clear perspective for membership to these states, not just like Bosnia-Herzegovina, but Macedonia also feels alienated by the EU because it was recognized as a candidate state. Macedonia was recognized as a candidate state, but the EU was slow or seemingly reluctant to initiate the accession negotiations, and this actually led to a rise of nationalist feelings in Macedonia. And so the EU feels that, or the way it looks like, the EU thinks that it can use membership as a kind of carrot, as a way of encouragement for the adoption of political reforms in Bosnia, in Serbia, and it works to a certain extent. But these countries want to see a more clear vision because they are small countries. Like for instance, Kosovo, it's like the size of our Central Anatolian province of Konya. 2 million people, or Bosnia-Herzegovina, around 4 million people. So these are very small countries, landlocked countries, and these countries do not have another option other than the EU when it comes to regional integration. So they want to see a more clear vision of EU membership So far, the EU gave them provided some benefits like visa-free travel, but this doesn't really make a difference in practice, because free travel or visa-free travel means that you can actually visit any Schengen country for 90 days, then you need to go back to your country of origin. So that means you don't have any work visa, work permit. So it doesn't really make any difference because when you need to join.
Why did Europe about the issue of Bosnia-Herzegovina? And I want to ask why Europe could not act sufficiently in that case. And as a second question, what are the U.S. regional interests for Balkans?
Well, the EU, like we said at the time, it was in a process of deepening its integration because it was the European community and it was turning into the European Union. And it was in the EU, that process of restructuring entailed certain reforms, certain challenges for the EU as well. But when the war, when the conflict actually in Bosnia-Herzegovina broke out, I remember, I think it was the foreign minister of Luxembourg, that's a small European state. He said that it's, the Yugoslav war, I can't remember the exact wording, but along the lines that it's time for Europe to show its strength, to show its capacity to resolve conflict. So there was this overconfidence on the side of the European countries at the time. Because first of all, that was a conflict in their own backyard, and the conflict actually triggered the most serious refugee crisis since the Second World War. So they felt that it was a case to test their ability as a union. But there were disagreements among European states from the beginning of the Yugoslav conflict. I'm going to give you one example here, just to show you how the EU was split. When Croatia and Slovenia declared their independence, Germany was the promoter, or was the most supportive power in Europe that endorsed, that actually pushed for the recognition of Croatia and Slovenia. And Germany, at the time, there was an international European arbitration commission was established, and it was mandated to review the applications of Croatia and Slovenia for the recognition of their independence. And Germany made it clear that, announced that they would actually extend their recognition even before that commission actually revealed its opinion. So Germany from the beginning was in favor of supporting Croat and Slovene independence, and this was criticized on certain other grounds. Actually, it was seen by some as a kind of apology by the Germans, or kind of compensation for what they did during the Second World War, because Croatia and the region actually was occupied by the German army during the Second World War. So this was seen as a kind of compensation by Germany in 1991, 1992. And other countries had their own agendas there, regional states, and it was also the time of the disintegration of the Soviet Union, the outbreak of conflicts in former Soviet republics as well. And the EU, it's not a military power. It is a union of different states, but it doesn't have a common, army. And it was undecided, it was divided over as to the question of whether there should be a military intervention. So, and the US was, at the time, the US was busy with the conflict in Somalia in 1993. And it turned out to be a big disaster for the U.S. because some 18 U.S. Marines were killed in Mogadishu, and this led to a withdrawal of the U.S. troops from Somalia. And this was the reason why there was no strong U.S. or U.S. Why the U.S. was not was actually reluctant to send its troops to Rwanda in 1994. So it was like, the case was like the US was involved in the conflict in Bosnia and Herzegovina once the Europeans proved that they were unable. They were actually weak, and they needed the US involvement. So the US actually demonstrated itself as the only strong and willing superpower with the ability, with the capacity to use military power. And so it was an important test case for different countries, and Europe was divided and still divided. It was divided in 2003 when the US was in favor of a military operation against Saddam Hussein, and the US was divided, like France and Germany were opposed to the US, and the new EU member states like Poland was a strong supporter of the US, and so that's another example of the split in Europe. What was the second question,
Regional U.S. interests.
Regional U.S. interests. I think I partially also replied to that question. It was a test case for the U.S. to show itself, to demonstrate its capacity as a global actor, as a superpower with the ability, with the willingness to use military force as a strategic approach or solution to conflicts. And we saw this in after Bosnia and Herzegovina, we saw this in Kosovo as well, where the US-led NATO intervention put an end to the conflict a few years later, after the Bosnian conflict.
I'd like to ask a question. Actually, what you have just mentioned might be an excuse for United States, but we talked about humanitarian intervention during our courses, and there was clearly a violation of human rights during civil war in Bosnia. My question is about United Nations position to this conflict. Why do you think the United Nations intervened effectively? I know they sent. Yes, ineffectively. I know they sent their military forces into region, but they didn't fulfill their role effectively.
They couldn't achieve their mandate. That's a very good question, actually. We're talking about the early, immediate post-Cold War era, 1992. Many of you were not even born back then at the time. So it was an important time period because it was the time when when we actually were, or the world actually was experiencing a transformation. The Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991. And it was the end of the Cold War. Germany actually that was united in 1989. So there were expectations and positive expectations. There was euphoria about the future, about the ability of the UN, to be able to effectively respond to conflicts, because during the Cold War era, the UN's functionality was seriously undermined by the use of the veto power by the US and the Soviets. So once that superpower rivalry disappeared, people were optimistic that the UN actually would be able to function more effectively. And there was also a willingness, enthusiasm by the UN member states, or by on the side of the UN, to deploy its forces to different war-affected countries, from Somalia to Bosnia. What happened in 1992? I also would like to add one more thing. In addition to that euphoria or optimism about the future of the UN, about the emerging, supposedly more peaceful, more stable international environment, there was also this famous declaration, famous argument by Francis Fukuyama, who argued that the disintegration of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, marked the end of history, marked the end of history, marked the triumph of a liberal democratic government as the dominant model of government. So the war in Bosnia-Herzegovina showed that Fukuyama was perhaps too early to say this, or perhaps wrong to put forward this argument. And it was the beginning of a new era, emerging new environment. And what was happening was that the type of conflict was also changing. It was changing since the end of the Second World War. Since the end of the Second World War, what we see in terms of patterns of conflict is that we see more conflicts taking place within the boundaries of states instead of conflicts or wars between states. And these conflicts created new or challenging problems like refugee flows, instability, spread of fighting into neighboring states. Human rights violations, systematic human rights violations. Clearly there were systematic human rights violations in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the dilemma was here whether it was actually legal to initiate a military operation, military action for preventing or reducing, halting human rights violations in another state. There was this tension between sovereignty and human rights at the time. This is one part of the story, whether human rights violations in a state requires or legitimizes a foreign military intervention with the authorization by the United Nations, or whether this is a breach of international law. That's something else. But what the UN did was sending a peacekeeping force to Croatia and to Bosnia. And in Bosnia, these peacekeepers were mandated to protect the so-called safe havens or the safe areas for the Bosnian people. And Srebrenica was one of them. This year is also the 20th anniversary of the Srebrenica massacre. And the people there in Srebrenica, they were told that Srebrenica, that camp, that UN protected place, area, was safe. They were told that they can come over there and they can rely on the UN peacekeepers. But Srebrenica was under Serbian attack, under the attack of Serbian military and paramilitary forces. And unfortunately, the UN peacekeepers deployed there was under-resourced, and they were actually, the number of peacekeepers actually was not sufficient. And another thing that was emphasized by UN peacekeepers there, that they were mandated to use force for self-defense only, because they were not attacked by the Serb paramilitary forces. They were not actually authorized to use force. So that was another thing. So, but in the end, that Srebrenica was abandoned by the UN peacekeepers in July. And at the time, the peace talks were still being coordinated elsewhere. So Izetbegovic, Tudjman, and Milosevic were negotiating the terms of the peace agreement. The UN was on the ground, but the people were being killed. And in a few days, actually, 8,000 people were killed there. And they were supposed to be protected by the United Nations. That's one of the tragedies. And no one is, has yet to be held responsible for that. Mm-hmm.
question which is relevant with your background information. I want to ask about the UN and NATO's position during the peace building process, because as you know from the background information that there was peacekeepers like Dutch army were there, and there was lots of different countries who are coming from different places for from NATO and from UN's attempts that they were there, but they left there. So the Serbians came and they killed all these people. And in these days, before 2 days before I heard the news about the NATO, they started to have a dialogue with Montenegro. I don't know if it is true or not. The UN and NATO are start to set a dialogue between Montenegro and making them like country or something like that.
Montenegro is a republic, independent state, so there's nothing wrong with NATO or Montenegro. Montenegro was part of Yugoslavia. Later they declared their independence.
I'm a little bit confused about it because we are still seeing the NATO and UN, even though their leaders thought that their leaders resigned. Like in this time, there was an Undersecretary General who resigned. I don't know. There was lots of resign, and they also discussed and they also criticized themselves that they did not manage the situation so practically.
Yeah,
so I can still see that in Balkans there is still UN and NATO attempt. Like, and how that can be possible? Because I know that they did something wrong, but they still are trying to do, or they still trying to manage the
region.
The whole region, the territories. So it's confusing.
I'm confused too. That's very difficult. It's a challenging. Like we're talking about conflicts, civil wars taking place, like the civil war in Syria. So it creates lots of dilemmas for foreign actors as to the type of action you should take. And according to some people, according to some analysts, there should be no foreign intervention in civil war situations. According to some, there should be intervention because this is a moral action. This is part of a moral obligation that if there is a human suffering, then other members of the humanity should do something to stop or halt the human suffering taking place in another country. According to some others, realists, you shouldn't intervene to another state unless there is some direct national interest considerations there. So there are different arguments in relation to intervention. And there is a lack of agreement on how intervention or when intervention should be undertaken by whom, when to intervene, how to intervene. And in the case of Bosnia-Herzegovina, when the war was fought there in 1992, 93, 94, 95, 4 years. We talked about the eruption of violence in March 1992 and the conclusion of, or the signing of the Dayton Agreement in late November 1995, 3.5 years. Sarajevo was under siege, snipers were killing people, hunting people, and this was actually taking place before the eyes of the world community. And it was actually being broadcast, and unfortunately the strategic approach the UN adopted was based on peacekeeping. Maybe we should make a conceptual distinction between peacekeeping and peace building. Peace building means the deployment of troops to a war-affected country with the objective of separating the fighting groups and with the objective of acting as a neutral buffer zone and with the objective of implementing a ceasefire agreement. So peacekeeping, as the name itself says, there should be peace to keep on the ground. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, there was no peace to keep on the ground. So the fighting was going on. The wartime conditions were there. Groups actually were fighting, killing each other, and the UN troops were sent there with the objective of keeping the peace, where there was no peace. So it was actually doomed to fail from the beginning, because there were ceasefire agreements and the parties actually occasionally violated these agreements, and definitely peacekeeping was not the right approach, as it happened in Rwanda. In Rwanda, for instance, the UN sent troops, set up a mission there to facilitate Rwanda's transition from conflict to development. But for such a challenging mandate, only some 2,500 peacekeepers were sent to Rwanda. And Bosnia-Herzegovina was not different. So there is an ambitious, mandate there, keeping the peace, preventing the resumption of violence, providing free passage of aid workers, delivery of humanitarian aid to the people of Bosnia-Herzegovina. It was a challenging mandate, and you are under-resourced, so you can't really achieve this mandate. Another thing, NATO, like I said before, the US was not involved in the resolution of the conflict. The EU thought that they can solve this problem, but turned out to be they can't. And NATO actually, after the military operation that NATO launched in 1995, there was some result actually in the field. And it was after NATO's military action that we saw these three leaders actually get around a negotiation table. And it was after the U.S. intervention, U.S. demonstration of its willingness, that we saw some positive steps towards actually putting an end to the conflict. It wasn't a perfect solution. No one says that. Dayton is actually an excellent example of peace building. But for some others, it was the only viable option at the time, and that's what they say. But when you look at NATO on the one hand, UN on the other, NATO has more resources. NATO has a more clear leadership, the US leadership. But when you look at the UN, we see many problems. First, the UN doesn't have its own army. The UN has its, has its peacekeepers that are allocated by member states. And the UN doesn't have its own structure, own budget. Its functionality is dependent on the will of its 5 permanent members. NATO is more effective strategy or structural organization. So NATO has more advantages than the UN, I would say.
Actually, let's come to today. Let's come to Bosnia in today's contemporary world. When we look at the demographic structure in Bosnia, we can, as you mentioned, we can see an almost equal division. But this structure results in many problems. How do you think it has impacts over decision-making process in Bosnia? I mean, when we think about the conditions of Dayton Agreement, there are lots of problems which couldn't be solved at the end of by Dayton Agreement. Just as an example, a totally complicated political system exists in Bosnia.
Well, the thing is that actually this institutional structuring put in place in Bosnia and Herzegovina is referred to as power sharing or consociational democracy as referred in the academic literature, which means that ethnic groups are allocated with a certain number of seats in the parliament, and power is shared between the elites of different ethnic groups. Like you can actually have this example in Switzerland, in some other ethnically divided countries as well. But in order for consociational democracy to work, certain conditions should be met. First, there should be willingness on the part of ethnic groups to work together. There should be some shared expectations, some willingness to work around certain common problems. There should be mutual respect between by elites. We don't see these conditions in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We don't even see any contacts between Bosnian people. They are separated. And here we have all these institutions. Like it is very difficult to understand the institutional system introduced to Bosnia. There are institutions at the federal level, at the Bosnia-Herzegovina level. There are institutions at the entity level, at the federation, at the Bosnian Croat Federation and the Republika Srpska. And then we have cantons in the federation, the Muslim Croat Federation. And here, for instance, if you look at the state structures at the federal level, at the Bosnia-Herzegovina level, there is a presidency, and that presidency is based on a tripartite system, which means the Serbs, Bosnians, Muslims, and the Croats, actually, their leaders, who are elected by the people directly, assume the role of presidency once every 6 months. The presidency, based on this tripartite system, is elected for 4 years, and it's based on a rotating system. So we have that, 3 presidents. And the system, actually, this tripartite presidential system at the Bosnia-Herzegovina level is not helping reduce the appeal of ethnicity in politics, because say there is an election, presidential election in Bosnia-Herzegovina for presidential election, and in that election, each candidate needs to define its identity by reference to 3 groups only. You cannot identify yourself as both Croat and Jewish. You need to identify yourself as Croat. And you cannot actually compete. You cannot run for the position if you're a Roma or if you're Jew. You need to belong to one of those 3 ethnic groups: Muslim, Croat, and Serb. And this is, the system is based on ethnic divides. And people are voting according to ethnicity. And this is actually rather strengthening the walls of divide in Bosnia. It's not really helping reduce the salience of ethnicity or creating the conditions of sustainable peace.
As far as I remember, there was a case which is called Sejdic and Finci. These are the guys who are citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they
went to the European Court of Justice.
Yes, European Court of Justice.
Argued that this is unfair, because this is actually exclusive. This is excluding others. Like if you look at the demographic information or information about the population of Bosnia and Herzegovina or Kosovo, you will see this reference to the term other or others. In Bosnia, like 40%, 48%, according to the CIA statistics, 48% of the population is made up of is constituted by the Muslims, Bosnians. Some 30% by the Serbs, and some 15 by the Croats, and 0.6 other. That other includes Jews, include Roma. And the Roma are the most disadvantaged community throughout Southeastern Europe and Central Europe. Being in Roma means actually lots of means discrimination. You're exposed to discrimination, and here in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, if you're Roma, you can't really. Is both Croat and Roma. You can only identify yourselves as Croat, as Bosnian, or as Serb. And here what's more interesting is that, in terms of ethnicity, Serbs, Croats, Bosnians, they all belong to the same ethnic group. They all speak the same language. It's only the religion, unfortunately, divides them. And Croats are Catholic, Serbs are Orthodox Christian, and Bosnians are Muslims. So religion is actually the main marker of identity, group identity. And group identity determines actually the conditions of personal, individual identity. So this is not a self-perpetuating thing. Institutions, the way in which institutions have been created are creating the conditions of dilemmas, stalemate. And the societal organization arrangement is actually reproducing the conditions of ethnicity-based individual and collective identity. So it's not really helping solve the problem. The root causes of problem, the root causes of the conflict are still there. And the structural solutions or institutional structures put in place there are not actually successful in terms of addressing the root causes of the conflict there, which are still there. In addition to this conflict, in addition to these problems, in addition to the centrality of ethnicity as the basis of individual identity and political choices, we need to talk about other problems as well that have the potential to trigger instability or maybe return to violence in the future. Cannot be ruled out because these are very fragile countries. Fragile countries, and they are dependent on external intervention, external assistance in terms of financial terms, in terms of military terms. And Bosnia is now, because there are other conflict areas like Syria, Libya, that are attracting attention from NATO. So Bosnia is actually losing the level of attention it had 5 years ago, 10 years ago. There are other conflicts, and the international community is moving, on to other conflict areas as well. So that's another thing. And Bosnia and Herzegovina, unfortunately, 2/3 of the young people are unemployed. Youth unemployment rate is approximately 60%. In other words, every 3 Bosnian young people are unemployed. That's another source of tension, instability. So that's what I was referring to, part of what I was referring to, positive peace. You need justice. Justice, according to Johan Galtung, is a sine qua non condition for sustainable peace. If there are injustices, insufficient, ineffective governmental capacity in terms of providing justice, providing security to people, there is always risk for violence to break out, or structural violence is always there.
Speaking of army, I'm curious about what was the reason that Bosnian army was outpowered by the Serbs so easily. That, if it was because just you said that the Yugoslavian army was in the possession of the Serbs, or
dominated by the Serbs.
Dominated by
The Bosnia-Herzegovina did not really have its own army.
I mean, did they get any help?
Of course,
or any aid
of
from-
course, they did. Lots of fighters also from other Muslim nations went to Bosnia-Herzegovina to fight on the side of the Muslims there. This was a bloody civil war, and there were lots of different groups, lots of human rights violations committed by each of these groups. And unfortunately, civilians were the victims. And today, the army, that's an interesting thing here, each entity has its own armed force. These entities, Republika Srpska and the Bosnian Croat Federation, are actually operating in opposition to each other, not in opposition to maybe in competition with each other. And the future of the country is, it's very difficult to say something definitive about the future of the country, but clearly there are some signs of instability in the future. Because, just one example, Serbs or those or the Republika Srpska, they want more autonomy. They don't want to be part of this, decentralized or how to say, they want to be more autonomous in their own affairs. But the Muslims, Bosnians, want a more central state structure that is seen as a threat by the Serbs. That is an example of institutional development in competition with each other. When it comes to the Croats, they are ambiguous because some Croats are in favor of the creation of a Croat-dominated entity as a third entity. So these are, mutually exclusive or competitive political agendas that each party has. And what's going to happen once the international community actually withdraws its presence from there? Because the state structure is fully dependent on foreign supervision and foreign assistance. It is very dysfunctional. It's not working. It's very fragile. Not self-sufficient, in other words. So I don't want to paint a pessimistic picture of Bosnia-Herzegovina. I'm not saying that there will be war there, but the potential or the fault lines exist, and they should be addressed more effectively. If we're talking about a functioning state structure, there is no functioning state structure in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Corruption is a big problem. Rule of law, weaknesses. Nepotism. Remember what I said, being a politician, being a member of the parliament, and there are lots of parliaments there, is actually a source of good income, while a majority of the people are unemployed or receive little in terms of payment. Politicians live in luxury. And their salaries are actually better than some European states as well. So that's another thing. And those political leaders, elites, some of them are allegedly part of some groups, some illegal groups who benefit